Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very well today. We're here playing some more Golgari because we cannot get enough of Fair Magic. Fair Magic is where it's at. It is fun to interact and it is rewarding. Decisions matter, and that's how we like it. So we're on the draw. We've been on the draw a lot lately. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but it's totally fine. We're gonna live, and we've got a sweet hand. We've got turn 1 Inquisition, turn 2 Tarmogoyf probably, although we can Brutality turn 2 if need be. And, we do kind of need to draw into some gas, but this hand is perfectly serviceable. If we need to turn these excess lands into more gas with Brutality, we can do that as well. But you can never be too mad about Inquisition into Tarmogoyf in a blind game 1. So our opponent will not mulligan, and neither will we. Let's see what they are doing. Watery Grave and pass. Alright. Not enough information out of that to tell too much. Whereas some, like a Celestial Colonnade, for example, would be a lot more of a tell. Watery Grave is not, because blue-black dips into a lot more colors than just control. And even if it is blue-black control, kind of like the blue-red color pairing, there's no real defined way to play it quite yet. So we can derive very little from that. We're pretty happy to draw Scavenging Ooze there. That seems like a good draw at the moment. Let's see our opponent's hand. Okay, we are against Thopter Sword. Now, I'll just take a quick minute. I know there are some people looking for some footage against Tier 1 decks. This isn't one of them. I'm sorry, but this was a fun matchup. It's a quick one to record and upload, and I am still on the hunt for some good quality gameplay against the Tier 1 decks of the format to bring to you. So stay tuned, but for now, let's enjoy this matchup against Thopter Sword. This is the half of the namesake combo of the deck. Thopter Foundry combines with Sword of the Meek to create not infinite 1/1 tokens, but basically as many as the opponent has open land. Because they can sacrifice Sword of the Meek to the Thopter Foundry ability, then Sword of the Meek will come back when the token's created. Is basically how that works. So it's a nice little value combo that does not win the game by itself, but generates a really wide board, gains them a lot of life. It's really tough to grind through once it's up and rolling for a couple turns. So they have a couple Thopter Foundries. They play an Ensnaring Bridge, or at least this player does main deck. I don't know how stock that is. That's obviously a problem for us, although we do pack a lot of answers to it in the main, which is nice. And Whir of Invention, which is definitely a really, really strong upgrade to decks like this, like Lantern Control. Just tutoring for the missing piece of whatever they need for the combo or the lock is really amazing. So they've got a nice little hand. So what do we take? Well, I would be pretty happy to take a Thopter Foundry here if they only had one of them. Unfortunately, they have two, so they have redundancy there. Also, keep in mind we can follow up with a Collective Brutality next turn. So I think Whir of Invention is actually the one piece I would take if I only had one take. But because I can Brutality next turn if I want to, I actually choose to take the Ensnaring Bridge here, even though it's not an immediate problem. I believe that is the strongest take. Now, I can get punished if they draw another Whir or what have you, but for now, with the information we have, I think that's the take. And you can't play too scared with your discard. Like, it's better to take away what's best in the moment and then, make them top deck something good. They top decked a Welding Jar. Okay. That's a good one in this matchup for sure. We've got a lot of ways to destroy their various permanents, and now they have a way to protect that. So fair enough. They deploy a Thopter Foundry. Pass it back to us. We draw Thoughtseize. It seems pretty good, right? It seems pretty good, but what are they going to do next turn? So we have to take this Whir of Invention. Let's get that out of the way. We've got no choice but to take that. Otherwise, they go get the Sword of the Meek, and they're just going to go off with the Welding Jar to protect it. Not that we have any answers in hand for their permanence anyway, so if we don't take Whir, it's going to get very bad very fast, so we have to take Whir. Collective Brutality can take the Whir just as cleanly as Thoughtseize can. So we just play a land in Brutality them, right? No escalation? Well, that's what I almost did, but then I thought it through a little bit more cleanly. Or a little bit more closely. So next turn they're going to go Delta into Foundry. Maybe they have a card stranded in hand. Probably not. They are an Ensnaring Bridge deck. They're very good at emptying their hand. And the life totals are relevant here because I want to clock them as fast as I can. I'm going to not be able to play a turn 2 threat, which is going to slow down my clock already. So you could argue that this is a little bit of an aggressive play, but I honestly think it's a pretty good one. If MTGO decides not to freeze up on me. There we go. Sorry about that. We're going way too fast. So let's wind it back a little bit. Gotta love this. Gotta love the functionality of this program. So we escalated with Brutality, pitching our Thoughtseize. Again, kind of banking on the fact that we know they're going to be able to dump out their hand, maybe including the card they top deck, maybe not. Either way, Thoughtseize is not going to be that good for that long. And our life total is relevant, so is theirs, so the drain is actually pretty fine here. Draining there also allows us to, potentially... We won't have to cast our Thoughtseize next turn, so we can preserve our life total with Tomb, or we can attack the graveyard with Skoos if we play that. It's just, again, you can argue that was a little bit aggressive, but I think there's some good rationale behind it. And yeah, see, that's kind of what I mean. They have Mox Opal, Mishra's Bauble, cards like this that there's just a pretty high chance they can just empty their hand if they see fit. And that would leave our Thoughtseize looking pretty dumb. Now, that said, they chose to hang on to this Thopter Foundry, and I legitimately don't know why. They are vulnerable now to Liliana of the Veil, though they're vulnerable to direct discard. They're maybe playing around like a Maelstrom Pulse to some degree, except they already kind of are with a Welding Jar, so it's a decision that I don't understand from our opponent. I'm probably missing something. I'll be honest with that. If it's obvious what I'm missing, then hey, let me know. Assassin's Trophy is a great draw. It's not as good as it would be without this Welding Jar in the picture, but it's a great draw. That said, we need to really get proactive here. So it's Tarmogoyf time. Scavenging Ooze is very good in the matchup. Potentially, it turns into kind of a war over who has more mana if we're trying to exile their sword while they're trying to return it. So it's not as strong as it might look on paper, but it's still very good. That said, we want to play just the fastest clocker quickly. We've already got them at 13. They've had Defection Shock a few times, so they're going to draw Field of Ruin. Sorceress Spyglass, that is probably what they found off of their Mishra's Bauble, so they're going to peek at our hand. As expected, they're going to name the Scavenging Ooze. That's pretty good. And they're finally going to empty the hand and play out that other Foundry. Alright. Draw another Assassin's Trophy. Now that is a beautiful thing. Trophy's downside is real, we all know this, but this is one reason I wanted to show this matchup. If we were on a build that only played 2 trophy or something, where we just have that many fewer chances to draw stuff like this for matchups like this, where, right now, if it made sense, we could pop the Welding Jar. If it made sense, if we prioritized the Skoos enough, we could pop the Spyglass. If they had a land that even was unbeatable for some reason, we could pop that. The card is insane. That said, I think what we need to do, much like we had to just grit our teeth and grind through all of the tokens in the Mardu Pyromancer video I made recently, here we need to grit our teeth and grind through all of the Thopter foundries protected by the welding jar. So I'm going to go ahead and main phase 1 just because they already know I have one. They saw it with the spyglass. And they do get the land. So then instead of firing off the other one, we're going to attack. Maybe incentivizing them to sacrifice an artifact to create a jump blocker and gain a life. They do not. That's fine. And, they're a blue deck. I frankly don't think they play that much counter magic main, if any at all. But hey, trophy, the land off trophy doesn't come in tapped or anything, so there's no reason not to just main phase this and play around any and all shenanigans they could have. This will indeed prompt them to crack the welding jar, so yeah, that jar was a really good find for them, but hey, we're getting them low on artifacts, and if we find one more removal spell, we might be able to take them off of foundries altogether. They're going to find a Witchbane Orb. So this is, the Destroy All Curses text is basically flavor text as far as Modern is concerned. It's just a hex-proof artifact that they can tutor for with Word of Invention and sacrifice as foundry fodder, so it's quite good in the deck. Probably just a one of. There's some toolboxy cards like these in the deck. It's honestly a pretty cool sub-theme of decks like this. We draw Field of Ruin. Alright. Not very exciting, but we're going to get in with a Tarmogoyf before we show them anything else, force them to make a decision. And yep, they're going to just cash in that Witchbane Orb for 1 life and a jump blocker. They'll take the block. Alright, Field of Ruin. Now, I'm going to crack this hitting the steam vents. So 3 options here, actually. Number 1 is to hit their Field of Ruin. And the reason I would do that is in case they're able to kind of start stabilizing and then I draw like a Treetop Village or a Hissing Quagmire next turn, getting the Field of Ruin out of the way in anticipation of that potential top deck is not bad. Another option is to hold up the Field of Ruin in case they present another land I care about more, or in case I find a Tireless Tracker. The third option is to do what I did and just do it now, thin out our deck a little bit, and hit the steam vents. Like, I'll be honest, I don't know what the red is for, but as a general rule of Magic, if you don't know what they're doing, like if you don't know why a card is in their hand, maybe you should take it with a discard spell. And if you don't know why they have red mana, maybe you should hit it with the Field of Ruin. Not a very scientific approach, I will admit, but certainly don't feel too bad about taking them off of red. They don't have a mountain to fetch either, so that's good. And we get to play our Grizzly Bears, because that's all that Scooz is while that Spyglass is around. Just a good old Grizzly Bears. They're going to pass with an unknown in hand. We're getting nothing good off the top, so that's pretty poor, but our board state is fairly commanding. We're going to crack in, and hey, we put them to 4. Feels pretty good. I kind of expected them to have something, and they did not. We hold the Blooming Marsh in hand for all the usual reasons. We're concealing information. We are holding fuel for Tireless Tracker or Collective Brutality. We are potentially baiting discard, although if they have any, it's almost certainly in the sideboard. They play an Academy Ruins. Okay, that's an example of a card that I would definitely like to have saved my Field of Ruin for. That said, it's not going to save them because it just puts something on the top. So they're going to need to throw away some pieces here or have something good in hand to stay alive. And well, I draw a Field of Ruin anyway. So if they're extending the game, we at least get to answer the ruins. As always, we're going to attack first to conceal information and force them to make a decision without access to information. During the attack step, they're going to put their Ensnaring Bridge back on top, and this is why we attack first, right? This is so good. This is so good for us. So they put the bridge on top, and then they cash in the Spyglass for a Thopter, and they cash in the Thopter Foundry. Now this represents them going all in on Ensnaring Bridge. They're going to make triple sure they stay alive this turn, because they're going to have 2 blockers and they're going to have a little extra life against any shenanigans I could have in hand. And, you know, they're just going to rely really heavily on this ensnaring bridge to keep them alive. It's honestly not a bad play at all. I don't think they did anything wrong there. They're going to throw a Thopter in front of the Goyf. My Scavenging Ooze cannot get any bigger right now. There are no creatures in the yard. So we just hit them with the Grizzly Bears. But we drew the Field of Ruin, and that is completely amazing because not only does it get to take them off of this very problematic land, it also forces the shuffle. Read the text on Field of Ruin. Each player searches their library for a basic land card. Unlike Ghost Quarter, unlike Path to Exile, this is not a may. This is a must. So we are forcing the reshuffle. Now, unless they're a very talented shuffler, ended up with the Ensnaring Bridge back on the top, we are in good shape. They didn't find the bridge because they're going to play a Welding Jar and pass. And here's an example of where reactive cards like Welding Jar, while I understand why they play them, it's a very mana-efficient play. Turns on Mox Opal. It is just very mana-efficient fuel for the combo, and does a good job of protecting the combo, so I'm not hating the card at all. But here, like, drawing this reactive defensive card in a situation like this, not very good. It's kind of like drawing a discard spell in a mid-range mirror when you're both in top deck mode. Liliana's a fine draw. We could take up to get whatever's in their hand out, but I think it's better to just edict that token. Make them have some way to stay alive against these 2 attackers. And they don't have it. So our beasties will crash in and end the game. Yeah, so we were... It looks really commanding, right? Like, we didn't take a single point of damage. We ended the game with a powerful board state, and we even flooded out in the mid to late game and still got there pretty comfortably. I would just like to point out that it was very, very, very close to going the opposite way. If we did not have an answer for that War of Invention and that early Ensnaring Bridge, I don't know where it went, but we discarded the bridge and with our Inquisition, and then we took the War of Invention with Collective Brutality. Now, if we didn't have an answer for the War, they just get the combo rolling probably on turn 4, and that represents, frankly, too much value for us to realistically grind through, especially game 1. And if we didn't take the Ensnaring Bridge right away, we might have still kept them off of the combo, but we're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and it goes into top deck mode, and they have a pretty good chance of assembling the combo and pulling way ahead before we can grind through an Ensnaring Bridge protected by some Welding Jars. So, looked like a blowout. Really was very close to being probably a blowout in their favor. So, a good game, and let's take a peek at the sideboard, see how we tech out against Thopter Sword. Alright folks, we are here figuring out how best to sideboard against the Thopter Sword deck. Now, just to give you the proper frame of reference from the start, I think this is a matchup where we have a lot of really good cards in the main deck already. So, a lot of this is going to be to taste, so I'm going to show you what I consider the tier 1 sideboard cards that should definitely come in, and then the tier 2 that are kind of maybes or preference based, and then we'll talk about what might come out, but this is not necessarily as clear-cut as some other matchups. However, right out of the gates, this column on the end here, I like a lot. Engineered Explosives is obviously a good way to attack their tokens to sweep up some of the 0 mana plays they make, like Mox Opal and Welding Jar. And, of course, Welding Jar can be sacked in response to any explosives activation, so they'll be able to at least partially mitigate it if they have one, but still very, very good. And it can be set on 2 to take away the Thopter Foundry and some other important permanents, perhaps. So explosives is for sure. Nile Spellbomb, so attacking their grave is good, but if they have a Sword of the Meek in the yard, they can usually get it back out in response. It's kind of the same style of gameplay as I mentioned in Game 1, where the Skoos and the sword controller kind of, whoever has access to more mana when the fight begins is going to win the fight over that piece, whether it comes back onto the field or is exiled. So for that reason, it's actually kind of hard for me to rate the strength of Spellbomb. I would probably say let's try one and leave the other out. Not a matchup for Fulminator Mage. It is a matchup for Maelstrom Pulse for sure. This has so many targets. They're going to bring in some grindy cards from the sideboard, you can be sure. Perhaps some things that deviate from Plan A. Most combo or combo-y decks like theirs have some kind of alternatives to their Plan A, specifically for matchups like ours that are heavily disruptive. So Pulse is a nice catch-all to that, and even against their main deck stuff, it's incredible. It hits the Thopter Foundry, it can hit Sword of the Meek, it can sweep up the tokens. Very, very good. This is the catch-all. Golgari Charm. Now, this is going to predominantly be a way to sweep up the tokens, which is pretty good, but if they're making a ton of tokens, that means they have the combo rolling, and that means this is just kind of a temporary reprieve. We have to disrupt the Sword of the Meek Thopter Foundry combo, above all else. So, destroying enchantment, yeah, maybe. Depends on really what they have out of the side, probably. Regen, man, not too excited about that. I'm going to put it in the maybe. I'm going to put that in tier 2. We'll take a look at everything else and see. Choke. Now, I'm going to put this in the maybe for now. I would need to look at a Thopter Sword deck list to see how many islands they actually play. We did see the Watery Graves. We did see a lot of basics. This is a good way to mitigate the downside of Assassin's Trophy. I actually quite like it. That said, they do have Mox Opals. They do probably play Dark Slit Shores. A little bit hard to tell how strong Choke is going to be. Put it in the tier 2. Don't see a compelling need for Nissa, nor Obstinate Baloth. Don't think this is the matchup where we want too much more of the top end. I do like Surgical Extraction here. Now, again, they might have, and almost certainly will have, some Plan B stuff to bring in. I still think it's going to be pretty nice to get one of the key components out of their deck entirely. It also might let us see exactly what their 60 looks like, right? So if we fire it off T2 or Game 2 and it's not incredible, the deck information is not nothing. It's never a reason to bring this card in, but in this particular matchup it seems fairly useful. Thopter Sword is kind of an unfinished and rogue deck to some degree, so that's a bit of an upside. Duress I do like. I definitely like the Duress. I think Hand Disruption here is pretty good, but we don't necessarily wish to overload on it because they can empty their hand quickly, and we don't want to give ourselves too many bad top decks. That said, Duress is a pretty strong piece of interaction. Brutality is fine, but given what I just said, and given that we already have 2 in the main, I'm going to say no to the 3rd Brutality. And I'm also going to say no to this stuff. Again, just like Golgari Charm hitting the tokens is a temporary reprieve, the same deal applies to these Wrath effects, and they're way worse. They're sorcery speed, they cost twice as much, and they can kill our own stuff too. So, not interested there, and Kalidas is not particularly compelling here. So, we've got 5 cards that we want for sure, 2 that are maybes. We could even say maybe the Spellbomb is just a maybe as well. So we definitely got to make 4 cuts, and now this is what I mean. Look at our deck. It's pretty great. Fatal Push is the standout worst card to me. I also don't quite know how to rate Lily. I think she might be a little clunky here. She's a realistic win condition in terms of alting. That's a very clean answer to a lot of their stuff. That said, she's pretty bad against the tokens in terms of protecting her and making her useful, and they can empty their hand pretty quickly. So I think we can afford to cut a Lily. Maybe this should be more. I look forward to somebody correcting me on that if I need to be corrected. Fatal Push, yeah, I think we're interested in mostly moving away from these. So if I were to just bring in 4 cards, it would probably look like that. This is viable. It's also viable to say, hell, let's just go crazy, bring in the other 3, in which case I would probably be looking at cutting the final Fatal Push. Maybe trimming a Thoughtseize, because Duress is just better to my knowledge. I don't think they're playing many, if any, permanents that cost that can't be hit by either Inquisition or Duress. And again, like I said, our life total is relevant. Then from there, we would probably... Tough to say. We could trim a Brutality, or we could trim an Assassin's Trophy. That's probably what I would be looking toward. But regardless, sideboarding is going to look something like that. So I guess we could trim another Liliana too. Those are kind of our options. So anyway, let's take a stroll over to Game 2, see how the post-side games treat us. Alright, my friends, we are back for Game 2 against Thopter Sword. Having won Game 1, we are on the draw. Our opponent will keep 7. We're going to keep 7 as well. We could ask for some different things. Like I said, Spellbomb is a little borderline. In the sideboard tech, I explained why. I actually think for this particular game, in the moment, these are, of course, replays, so you didn't see the live sideboarding. I think I actually boarded in both. So we do see one of them. That's okay. It might be good. Trophy is great. Trophy's fantastic here. Double Brutality, these are probably one of the weaker cards in the match. Seeing both is pretty poor. Liliana, like I said in the sideboard tech, she could be great. She could look a little clunky, especially on the draw, if they empty their hand quickly and or go wide quickly. That said, for all the hand's flaws, I don't think we're going to throw it back. I think it's a somewhat weak but keepable hand. Let's see what our opponent does. They're going to be crafty and play everything out in the second main phase. They had me thinking for a minute that they just kept a no-lander. But quite the opposite. They play a lot of... they play a land and an accelerant, and they don't quite have Metalcraft yet, but they're darn close. An Affinity-esque 3-card turn 1 to the field from our opponent. And sure enough, we drew our second Spellbomb. So that's looking pretty mediocre, but we're pretty happy at least to run one out. Might force our opponent to sequence differently. The beauty of this card in this deck, of course, we're so value-oriented. Worst case scenario, we can always cash it in as kind of a clunky cantrip, right? So they're never that bad to see. Our opponent just has to pass, so they didn't keep a no-lander, but they did keep a one-lander. Now, they might be holding up some trick, but right now they don't have access. They only have access to 1 colorless mana. So, drawing a 3rd land is much to my relief there. So we could, maybe play another Spellbomb and then cantrip or whatever, but I think we want to be proactive here and just Brutality for the discard mode. No need to get aggressive with the escalation here. If we were going to escalate, it would probably be the Spellbomb. But if we are planning to Lily next turn, and they're stuck on lands, we don't want to be forced to start pitching things like Assassin's Trophy to our own Liliana. So for that reason, we are conservative and we do not escalate. And we see all kinds of really powerful cards stranded in the opponent's hand. I can see why they kept this. If they draw another land or another artifact that they can play, then they can start to make some plays. But for now, everything is stuck. We see another Bridge, we see another Foundry, we see another War of Invention. These are all cards we saw game 1. They have Assassin's Trophy as well, probably out of the side as an answer to our stuff. This is definitely out of the side. This is what I mean about kind of the plan B. So even if we, like, discarded a Thopter, Foundry, and Surgical that here, they can still put all of the artifacts that normally fuel that combo to really good use with Gear per Ether Grid. This card, in my opinion, is absurdly powerful. I have always felt that this card is just off the charts good. And yeah, no surprise to see it in a matchup like this. That's why we like our extra Maelstrom Pulse out of the side, is for stuff like that. We take War of Invention because we don't want them to go off. If they have to play reactively, you know, trophying a Liliana or something, that's a fine position for us to be in. So War of Invention is definitely the card we fear the most in terms of what we could take with the collective. And they're still stuck. They got one unknown in hand, but no more mana sources. Alright, Engineered Explosives is a pretty good draw here, for sure. It's kind of an insurance policy against their tokens for a bit in case they do go off. We can also consider cracking it really aggressively to get rid of the Welding Jar. That's all it would do on 0, because Welding Jar sacks in response to keep this Opal alive. If this could cleanly kill the Opal, I would probably play it and crack it right now, just planning to kind of mana screw them out of the game. But because that is not an option thanks to that Welding Jar, at least for now, we're going to stick with the plan we expected to be on last turn, which is to just play the Liliana and make this a Liliana game. We're going to tick her up. Now, it in one way it feels a little bit bad because their cards are all unusable right now, and all of our cards are usable. So the symmetrical discard effect feels a little bit bad in that sense. That said, this is the proactive line. You know, she's got to be answered, and quickly. And if they do ever get rolling, all of the cards in their hand are legitimately powerful, so we're happy to see any of them go. Sure, no more Ether Grid sounds fine to me. We will pitch our extra Spellbomb, and we will pass. I think that's pretty clearly the weakest card in our hand at this moment. Oh, our poor opponent. They kept the risky one-lander with a Mox Opal and just are not getting any love from their deck. Maelstrom Pulse is a fantastic draw. Definitely a fantastic draw. Now, I considered just pulsing something right here. Pulsing the Mox Opal forces them to crack the Welding Jar. That would honestly be fine. But we know they have a trophy in hand, so Brutality represents pretty good value here. And we know that we're going to take up the Liliana after this. So the reason we do that, we sequence in this order, is so we know we have a take with Brutality. We don't want to take the Lily first, they pitch the trophy, then our Brutality whiffs. We are also planning to pitch our own trophy because we are pretty clearly not wanting to give them a land for any reason right now. So we lead on the Brutality, and hey, turns out they've got a bunch of targets for it. Their collective does not do too much that I care about at the moment, so even though trophy is going to be harder for them to cast, I'm interested in stripping a trophy away. Then we'll take up the Liliana, we'll pitch our own trophy, and our opponent also recognizes the fact that Brutality is a little medium right now for them, so they'll pitch it to the Lily. I'm just going to go ahead and get this Engineered Explosives down as well. Next turn we're going to, you know, if we draw land or something, we can pulse, we can tick Lily up, and then we're really, really good. But we're not even going to get that far. The opponent is just going to scoop it up. Presumably they, for the 4th turn in a row, failed to top deck a land. So I don't think the opponent did anything wrong there, really. Taking a mulligan against our deck, and this is a hidden power of Golgari and of other BGX strategies. Taking a mulligan feels very bad, and is very bad. We can leverage our opponent's self-imposed card disadvantage way, way better than most decks, because our 1-for-1 targeted discard becomes significantly more powerful if they start out down to 6 or down to 5. It becomes positively crippling against a lot of decks. So this is where we get a little bit of a taste of the unfair deck life in a weird way. Our opponents create some non-games of their own volition because they are afraid to mulligan. Now, let me be clear, like I just said, I don't think our opponent made the wrong decision. I think that was a perfectly respectable keep, given the fact that they were against an attrition deck. Mulliganing can be very bad. And they were just one land or one 0 mana or 1 mana artifact away from getting the Metalcraft going and then taking off from there. And their hand was packed full of really good stuff. So I do not think they made the wrong play, but hey, we certainly took advantage of it. Now, we didn't even need to find a creature. We just were going to Liliana them out of the game, to the point where, we had such good interaction waiting in the wings, even after taking the Lily up a few times. It just wasn't going to happen for our opponent. And so a little bit of a non-game, game 2, but I wanted to showcase this for a few reasons. Number one, in game 1, and indeed in game 2, even though it ended up getting pitched, we saw the potential, at least for the power and versatility of Assassin's Trophy. When you are running into decks like this, a lot of them are, just in terms of raw power and consistency, they're slightly below the top tier. But part of the reason they carve out a nice little niche in the meta is because they play the game on an axis that a lot of the tier decks, and in turn a lot of the decks that are prepared to face tier decks, struggle to answer cleanly. Like, a lot of decks struggle to win through just like 4, 5, 6 flying 1/1 Thopter tokens that gain you 4, 5, 6 life a turn. One of them finishing the chain with a piece of equipment that makes it a 2/3, just to add insult to injury. Stuff like that. Our deck, and I personally love this about BGX, and especially about Golgari, because it's such a clean way to do it. Our deck gives us game, broad game, consistent game, against all kinds of nonsense in the format. Literally, whatever our opponent is up to, unless it's to some degree big mana, we have answers for it. We have realistic outs to it that we will hit on a consistent basis. Even game 1 and even more so game 2. And even the big mana decks are not that as much of a boogeyman anymore, once again, because of this card Assassin's Trophy. So, good game, well played, and like I said in the beginning, I will be looking to pick up some entertaining matches against some tier 1 decks coming up here. But hey, we need to know how to beat everything in the format. If that is the fair deck's burden. Like, we can't just close our eyes, execute our linear game strategy, and hope it gets us there if we don't know what our opponent's up to. We have to know what our opponent's up to, otherwise we are going to flounder in a format as powerful and diverse as Modern. So, we need to take down the Thopter sword decks, just like we need to take down Tron and humans. Anyway, that rant out of the way. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more videos to come in the near future. Have a great day.